Welcome to the Love and Guts podcast. Dr. Sharon Erdrich. I just want to say Erdrich.
Erdrich. That's
Erdrich. I love that you say that. Well, welcome. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.
And
it's a pleasure to be here.
And we're both saying actually that we've got kind of wild and woolly weather in the background, so that's quite interesting too. So you're coming from Auckland. I'm, in New South Wales, and it's kind of windy and dreary and grey here. So let's just see where this conversation goes. We're talking about all things fibromyalgia and the link to the gut. But before we dive into that, which I'm sure everyone's just hanging on to here, I want to run through your bio, which everyone just loves sitting through, don't they? That it's important, especially if people may not be familiar with you. I'm sure lots of people are, but let's read through the bio so we can kind of get a bit of a deeper understanding of why the passion potentially with the gut and the microbiome and fibromyalgia. So Dr. Sharon Erdrich is a nurse, naturopath, herbalist, and nutritionist who completed her PhD investigating the relationships between the symptoms of women living with fibromyalgia, their digestive function, and the microbiome of the gastrointestinal tract. She has published 12 peer-reviewed research papers to date and co-authored the WNF's Health Technology Assessment chapter on gastrointestinal health. She has also co-authored a book chapter on nutrition in oral health. An experienced educator in undergrad and postgrad programs, Sharon holds an adjunct position with Southern Cross University, New South Wales, where she is delivering the Integrative Gastroenterology Unit on the Master of Advanced Naturopathic Medicine degree. Geez, you're busy. She operates a hydrogen methane breath testing lab in Auckland alongside her private clinical practice. Sharon specializes in supporting patients with a range of gastrointestinal problems from the perspective of diet and nutrition, and by addressing gut microbiota alterations as determined by breath testing and shotgun metagenomics, which we love here. Awesome. You are busy.
I'm busy, but just, I guess as a postscript to that, my clinical practice and my breath lab are currently on offer looking for new owners.
Oh, really?
So,
okay.
I'm in the process of getting ready to move to Australia. So,
oh, wow.
My practice here in Auckland will cease to exist as it currently is, and particularly the breath lab needs to be put into good hands.
Yep. And are you thinking any particular state? I know you've written a few papers with people like Jason Horolac and Stephen Meyer.
The late great emeritus Professor Stephen Myers. It was sad that he wasn't able to see the project through, and obviously other sadness with the passing of him as well. It will be New South Wales. I've got family in northern New South Wales, and
amazing.
And another member of my family is about to move to Gold Coast as well. So, and with my teaching and work with Southern Cross, I'll probably be doing a little bit more there as kind of the future plan.
Oh, amazing. Well, welcome. That's exciting. A nice part of the world too. We're not too far from that either.
Yeah.
So, but let's get into it because this is a very juicy conversation. Can you walk us through how you first became interested in the gut musculoskeletal connection and what prompted you to study fibromyalgia through the lens of digestive function?
I was reflecting on that and I was like, my goodness, this actually goes right back to when I was teaching undergrad naturopaths. And I was teaching pathophysiology and some basic diagnostic stuff. And I would actually have my students do at that time the 10-point diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia was the thing. So I'd have my students practice on each other, and I was a bit flabbergasted what percentage of my students actually would have met the criteria for fibromyalgia based on 10-point diagnosis alone. I was like, that's weird, can't be a real thing, And then I kind of got a bit more interested in it because I realized then that it's got a strong connection to digestive problems. And I'm like, gee, they're all the digestive problems that we don't know what's going on, and it's a pain condition that we don't know what's going on. And I was always attracted to this concept of idiopathic conditions. It's like, we're just idiots if we don't know yet. We have to find out. And then in 2000, 17 or 18, it might have been, when I was kind of teasing with the idea of undertaking a PhD, much to my family's chagrin, after the stress of doing a master's. I came across a paper that had been published in 2004 that reported that 100% of the people with fibromyalgia in the study had positive results on breath testing. So apparently they all had SIBO. And then I'm like, well, hang on a minute. If they've all got SIBO, there must be something in that. How come there's been nothing else published since then? And so that's what took me on the journey. Nobody else has published any papers on the relationship between breath testing or breath test results and fibromyalgia or their gut problems. And so that was the premise for the beginning of my research project. And of course, it just grew from there.
And is that something you also saw replicate in your clinic? Because obviously you've got the hydrogen and methane breath testing clinic. Did you see that pattern appearing clinically?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I mean, I never kind of promoted myself as a fibromyalgia expert, and I still don't really, or perhaps now I guess I am, but back then I wasn't. But the few people that I did have with fibromyalgia, with gut problems, absolutely, they had. In fact, the sentinel client there was a woman who'd been referred to me by her chiropractor because she'd been seeing a chiropractor for all her body pain, not understanding what it was. And the chiropractor kind of assessed that her gut problems suggested that, you better go and get that sorted out. And so with my assessments, I discovered that she did meet the criteria for fibromyalgia. And her SIBO was quite remarkable SIBO. And so I also kind of did some, pain score assessments on her and assessed them after treatment of her SIBO. And it was really fascinating to see how much her pain reactivity decreased as a result of treating SIBO.
And I just want to scale a little bit back because we do get a lot of practitioners listening to this podcast, but we also get the health conscious person, the person that may be experiencing some symptoms that are wanting to explore a little bit more. Can you actually bring it back down to what is fibromyalgia and what are some of the symptoms so people know what on earth we're talking about when we're referring to that?
Right. So if a person's got chronic pain all over, you've probably got fibromyalgia, especially if you've had the big players ruled out. So essentially, to get a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, a person has to have pain that amounts to 4 out of 5 regions of the body. So the body kind of gets divided up, head area, and then kind of go down the middle and cut it in half sideways. And each of those is a region. And then within each region, there's specific spots. So for example, the arm will be the upper arm and the lower arm. So each area gets scored if there is pain there. When a person meets the criteria, they've got pain in 4 out of 5 regions, and they've got pain. Look, it's a bit hard to be exactly definitive for your listeners in that regard because the number of regions or areas that you have pain in is allowed to vary depending on the other symptoms that you have. So this is the thing about fibromyalgia. It's considered a syndrome, which is a collection of symptoms. The other symptoms that really commonly go with the condition, in fact, so commonly that they form part of the diagnostic algorithm, is headache, sleep disturbance and or waking unrefreshed, depression, abdominal pain, cognitive dysfunction. Did I say fatigue? There's 6 things, yeah? So how prevalent those things are for a person and whether they've experienced them in the week leading up to the diagnosis or the assessment come into the equation as well. So all of those things are common sort of constellatory symptoms for a person who is suffering from chronic pain that just doesn't, it's not because they've injured themselves, and it's not because they've got an arthritis or a rheumatoid condition. It just seems to be for no reason.
Mm. And so you've written you've been part of some clinical papers, and in your 2020 systematic review, you found that people with fibromyalgia are significantly more likely to have IBS or other gut-brain interaction disorders, especially mixed pattern or constipation type IBS. Why do you think constipation or mixed type IBS appears more often than diarrhea predominant IBS in fibromyalgia patients?
So that's really, it was an interesting observation from the papers that I looked at. I think sort of going back to the actual papers that were found in that systematic review, we were quite strict with the inclusion criteria in terms of how people's diagnosis of a functional gut disorder was diagnosed. Was it according to the proper or the best practice tools at the time, and the same with fibromyalgia. So for both of these conditions, the functional gut disorders and fibromyalgia, the diagnostic criteria have changed over time. So if you've got diagnosed with something in 1980 and you presented today, the symptoms, even if you had the same symptoms, may or may not have you classified as having that condition. So that's just a little bit of a problem with our changing landscape, if you like, with these disorders. But in that particular review, nine of the studies we found that met the criteria just used the term IBS. They didn't actually specify this granulated understanding of IBS in the way that we know it. And only the other 5 of the papers, there was 14 papers in total, the other 5 did kind of granulate down a little bit more, but only 3 of them compared their findings to a control population. So it was really only reporting what we found in the literature based on a fairly wobbly kind of collection of papers.
Yeah.
What it highlighted for me was that IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, and the functional gut disorders, IBS was treated as one condition by most of the studies, and the functional gut disorders were treated as if they didn't matter at all by most of them. Only one of those 14 reviews included the broader range of functional gut disorders. So there was a lot more going on, I think, than what was shown in that paper. And why they might have, I just don't think that there were enough quality studies to say, yes, people with fibromyalgia have more of this pattern than that pattern.
Yeah, okay. But overall, the prevalence was about 46.2%, I believe. Those with fibromyalgia also had that IBS versus the global prevalence of 11%.
100%. So
crazy.
Yeah, 46. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So much more irritable bowel going on with those people for sure. Yeah.
And so your more recent 2023 observational Fidget Study, I won't read the whole thing.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
I love the Fidget Study, outlines a very comprehensive set of measurements. So microbiome, oral stool, human gene expression, diet, oxidative stress, breath testing, permeability tests, etc. Could you describe which of these you believe holds the greatest potential for unraveling fibromyalgia's mystery, and why? Because I still feel like a lot of it is a bit of a mystery in a way.
Yeah, it still is. And you look, while we collected a lot of data, I'm still analysing it. And in fact, some of the samples that we collected are still in a freezer.
Okay.
So the intestinal permeability testing hasn't been done. I haven't got any finance to do that. The human gene expression, that data has been analysed, but we kind of need to get it into some grunty computer because there's like 10,000 genes, so we have to kind of trickle it down to try to find those that are the most important. So some of the other testing that we haven't either done, we had some serum that we've neither yet analysed. So that's a funding related issue. I still think that the gut is really important here. And, there's been some work going on with some colleagues in a joint collaboration between our pain physician in Israel and McGill University in Canada, where they've been doing some funky stuff with fecal microbial transplant and finding
Fibromyalgia patients.
fibromyalgia patients and in mice.
Yeah.
And so they have found that they can take a sterile mouse, so, bred in sterile circumstances, and give it a fecal transplant from somebody with fibromyalgia. And within 4 weeks, that mouse will start to kind of mope around the place like a sad mouse. Trying to imagine what a sad mouse looks like. And then within another month after that, they just develop this hyper-reflexivity to pain stimulus. And then if they treat the mouse with antibiotics and give them fecal transplant from somebody who doesn't have fibromyalgia, it fixes them. So I think that's a pretty important preclinical study. That group has been doing some small numbers, fecal transplants of women with fibromyalgia from healthy donors as well. And so we're excited about the work coming out of that lab, because I think that the human microbiome is a fascinating organ. It's so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any sort of patterns, microbial patterns you see in those that experiencing fibromyalgia, sort of elevated levels of lipopolysaccharides? Like what are sort of some patterns that you see commonly in these? Obviously, everyone is different. Presentation may look very different, but are there sort of similar themes sometimes in these cohorts?
Yeah, so one of the things that we found a little, I guess you could say, disappointing with our project was that we didn't find any strong signal in terms of the microbiome that gave us a distinctive difference between women with fibromyalgia and women without. That's actually similar to other studies. The same research group that I was just speaking about also found that overall their diversity scores and the composition of the microbiomes doesn't really change between the two groups, but there are subtle differences. Now, in my study, we didn't do shotgun. We did the metatranscriptome, which means that we were only measuring biologically active microbes at the time of sampling. So our results aren't comparable to anything else that's out there, yet we did find some similarities in some of the microbes, some of the Clostridial species, for example. And one of the things I've been really hoping to do is to get this data from our human gene expression and go, okay, what are the human genes trying to do to help or counteract, or how have they been influenced by this condition? So that sort of reflects back to your question earlier. Have we got a signal yet? No, we don't. But maybe with this combined big picture view, which is what we always intended to get with the Fidget study, we can get that signal.
And what other sort of major hurdles are there? You've mentioned funding, but when it comes to the clinical studies and all those sort of unrealized testings that you guys have accumulated but haven't really been able to sort of analyze or whatever, get it together and see patterns and all the rest of it. Outside of funding, are there any other major hurdles when it comes to these investigations?
Well, not with the data that I've got. So I've kind of still maintained a relationship with the University of Sydney. So I've still got access to the data that's stored there and access to analytical things. So when I have an idea in my head, I can just sort of jump straight in and have a look, which is really exciting. But the main thing is to complete the picture is getting some support and the resources to complete these other samples, and then ideally putting the whole lot into one. We have this phrase called machine learning, where you kind of give it 10 samples that have got people with fibromyalgia and go, okay, from the data from those, can the machine or the computer tell us which of the rest of the 158 people were fibromyalgia and which ones weren't? That's kind of how those signals and diagnostic algorithms are discovered. It's like, okay, we tell the computer, we give them a sampling of people with the condition. Can it then predict who of the rest of the population have it and who don't. But we're not there yet.
How's AI sort of involved in all of this?
Well, I guess, you know, AI, as it's become known, is really just a glamorous search engine, but the kind of computer learning that we're talking about is a little bit more advanced than standard AI.
Yeah. And so can you unpack for our listeners what the axis, that gut musculoskeletal axis, means and how it might plausibly lead from gut dysfunction to widespread pain in fibromyalgia?
Well,
As much as we know.
Yeah, so the thing about the sort of whole gut whatever axis is this kind of understanding that no matter what the question is, if the gut's part of the question, you'll find something that's connected.
Yeah.
And so what we know is that the gut, I like to refer to it as a central processing tube. Everything that goes in it gets metabolized or becomes a metabolite from the processing that happens to it. And a lot of that processing is done by that population of bacteria and or other organisms that are living in there. And it's either absorbed, i.e. passively absorbed or actively absorbed, or it's excreted. And there are certain molecules that can trigger different reactions in different tissues. So a really good example is an understanding of how there's a kind of a type of peptide that is produced by some microbes that mimics the synovial fluid in the joints. And when there is a high production of that peptide by bacteria, the body performs antibodies against that. But that peptide looks so much like our joint tissue that the body reacts to that as well by mistake. So that's a kind of a mechanism that we call molecular mimicry. Whether something like that's going on in fibromyalgia or not, we don't really know. There was one earlier study that kind of raised this flag around there potentially being antibodies involved in fibromyalgia, but that kind of, a bit like lots of things like small fiber neuropathy, so something going on with the nerve fibers just under the skin. It's hard to find something that answers the question for everybody when it comes to fibromyalgia. It's a complex condition. It's a complex mix of things that we think are contributing to it. It's a mixture of environment, genetics, microbes, diet, trauma, history, all sorts of things.
Yeah, make some notes there because I really want to run through the trauma aspect of it. But hang on, this is raw and real. In that Fidget study, you mentioned measuring dietary intake, carbohydrate, fermentation, breath tests, plus microbiome and gene expression. How do you believe diet matters in the fibromyalgia gut relationship? And are there any particular dietary patterns that you tend to lean toward?
So I'll answer the last question first because I did my master's research investigating the effect of a modified Mediterranean diet on men with prostate cancer. And so men with prostate cancer, it's a far cry from women with fibromyalgia, but the diet was quite remarkable that the DNA repair that we saw happening as a result of following a Mediterranean diet. And the only one at the trade.
Sorry to interject, but modern version of it? Can you
modified. Modified.
Modified.
The quintessential Mediterranean diet, which is kind of embedded in Cyprus as the origin of it. We modified it to incorporate some things that were known to be beneficial in other research for prostate cancer. So one was making sure they had loads of broccoli.
Yeah, great.
To get sulforaphane into their diet, and also pomegranate.
Yes.
And I got sponsors for some salmon, some beautiful salmon from the South Island. And so the men got 200 grams of salmon a week each. And we, in terms of teaching them about the Mediterranean diet, I got samples of organic canned legumes from one of our organic suppliers that I was able to distribute to them. So to try to help them and give them a little bit of a leg up in terms of that Mediterranean style diet, which is heavy in vegetables, some fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes, lots of olive oil, and most of the protein comes from like feta cheese, the legumes, a bit of fish, occasional poultry, and more rarely four-legged animals. So that was the diet that I studied in my master's research. And, you know, when it comes to dietary surveys and dietary research, it still stands up as a really good diet. And it's, from a Western perspective, pretty easy to adopt. It's not extreme. It includes a really broad range of all of those different compounds that feed our microbiome, while ensuring that a person has adequate nutrients all round. So that's my preferred diet that I try to kind of have in the background when I'm guiding people with their diet. Obviously, depending on what's going on in their gut, will depend just what aspects of that they can bring in and how quickly. So going back to the first part of your question, the overarching difference between the woman with fibromyalgia and the woman without was that the woman with fibromyalgia's diet was far less healthy. So we used a tool called Diet ID, which some people know about. It's a photometric dietary assessment, and it's been validated against a food frequency survey. And it's just really quick and easy to do. So I was really mindful that I was working with a population of women who had a lot of fatigue and a lot of dyscognition as part of their condition. And I needed them to do lots of surveys. So I wanted their dietary one not to be a burden. So essentially they choose from pictures that are presented, which one looks the most like my diet. And over time, different pictures get presented to compare, and you're just whittling down and going through the choices until you end up with a picture that kind of goes, yeah, that's pretty much how I eat. And that's how we did our dietary assessment, and it calculates the healthy eating index. And like I said, women with fibromyalgia had a much less healthy diet overall. There were some quite specific things that I also found when I sort of went into the detail. So women with fibromyalgia tended to have higher sodium diets. They had more added sugar, and the added sugar as a percent of their calories in total was higher. They had lower omega-3. They had less fiber. They had less dietary magnesium. So then there were correlations between those things as well that could be linked to some of their symptoms. So yeah, I think diet's important.
And you can see why the Mediterranean diet would be very helpful in this.
100%. It kind of ticks all those boxes, yeah.
For a lot of people, a lot of conditions. Given that you mentioned that prevalence between SIBO and fibromyalgia people, how does the diet change for you in that group of people, or does it not change at all? Do you still recommend that kind of modified Mediterranean or Mediterranean diet, or are you being a little bit more conscious of higher FODMAP foods?
So you talk about how I practice generally in clinic. Yeah.
Well, no, when it comes to that presentation of, if you get a SIBO patient that has fibromyalgia, how are you supporting that patient when it comes to diet?
Yeah, I think it probably wouldn't matter whether they had fibromyalgia or not in this case. So one of my mantras that I live by is that no matter what symptoms you're getting from food, it's not the food that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's something going on in your internal organism. And sure, I can support you to have a more restricted diet while we figure out what's going on and put some strategies in place to address that. But essentially, my goal is always to get them back to eating everything. We're humans. We should be able to cope with everything, unless we've got, celiac disease or some, FPIES or allergy or, some specific reason to avoid a specific food or group of foods. Then I'll only avoid them for symptom control until we get to a point where we can start bringing them in little by little, bit by bit. I mean, I get people to get pans of lentils and freeze them in ice cube trays, for example. And so when we feel like we're ready to start testing that, we can bring out an ice cube and thaw it out, and you just mix that in with whatever you're cooking for dinner. It just disappears into your dinner, or mash it up and put it on a cracker or whatever, as a way to start treating that gut like the digestion of a baby, where you only give it very small amounts of a food when you're introducing it after a long time of abstinence.
Yep.
Sometimes the foods that people are avoiding gives really good clues as to what or where in their gut the problem is. And so I kind of use that to help guide me when I'm working with people, to try to take their fear of food away.
Yeah, I love your answer to that. I feel as though a lot of the guests that I've had on over the past year, we're all discussing about minimizing food restriction as much as we can, taking away that sort of fear around food, and trying to avoid that poor relationship to food, or development of poor relationship to food. So I love that answer, because it's, yes, we might need to reduce the symptoms. And so you might take them off certain foods for a period of time, but it's not a forever thing. It's a matter of your body's designed to be able to tolerate these things. Let's work on the underlying problem, and then slowly and methodically bring those foods back in, with the goal of opening up, diversifying the diet a bit more.
Without that diverse diet, you can't have a diverse microbiome. So that's kind of the underlying tenet behind it all. And I think it's just really important for people to realize that. Stop blaming the food. Stop trying to find what other food that you're still eating might be a problem as well, because it's not the food. It's what's happening to the food inside your digestive system, and that's what needs supporting.
So you mentioned trauma. How much do you want to get into that? Can you give us some insight as to your research around the link between trauma and fibromyalgia?
Didn't go there.
Didn't go there?
Oh, didn't go there.
I'd love to.
Look, the survey that my poor woman with fibromyalgia, their survey was like 250 something questions already, plus multiple, 4 visits to my clinic for testing and samples, and then the 6-hour or the 4-hour, we only did 4 hours, lactulose mannitol test at home. It was a huge commitment. Even my controls complained about how hard it was to do it. So I didn't go down the trauma route. I think lots of people have had trauma, and I find it in almost everybody has got trauma of some kind in their background, me included. I don't have fibromyalgia. So I think it's one of those things when we talk about predisposition, there's this whole concept of epigenetics. And it's possible that there's, so far, what we don't know about maybe a genetic trigger or a genetic predisposition, that an event works as an epigenetic switch for a person that flips them into somebody, suddenly you're more susceptible to developing fibromyalgia. And maybe like with our recent understanding of things like Parkinson's disease, it's a triad of things that you need to have in order to have Parkinson's disease. You can't just have the gene and you've got it. There has to be these other elements present as well. And it may be with some of these other mysterious conditions that's what we find as well. Chronic fatigue. I think what's happening in the chronic fatigue world as a result of post-COVID fatigue is going to be beneficial to the chronic fatigue syndrome, and by association, fibromyalgia, because there's links between them. Sure. So it's a huge year. It's kind of an exciting time to be in, really. But no, I don't think that it's I don't think that trauma is the cause of fibromyalgia.
Yeah. So you reference that both for FGID, functional gastrointestinal disorders, and fibromyalgia might fall under that central sensitivity syndromes. How do you see the gut signals interfacing with the central nervous system hypersensitivity?
So it's a big topic.
Yes.
The whole central sensitization. So
can we nut down the chain of events?
So we just define central sensitization first, shall we?
Yes.
So I think a really good analogy is kind of imagine that your brain's got a pain volume switch, so that when you get a stimulus, your brain has the ability to sometimes tone it down. You go, oh, it's just that aching knee, I'll be all right, and away you go. So in a central sensitization disorder, that volume switch is turned up, and it's like there's no down on it. And a person will be overreactive to pain that is more than the pain itself, or that persists for longer than the pain stimulus. So, after an injury, for example, the injury's been done and dusted, but the person's still experiencing pain beyond when somebody who doesn't have that volume knob controller dysfunction on their nervous system. Does that kind of make sense on that?
Yes.
So, and it can happen even when the stimulus isn't noxious. And I saw that with women when I was doing their blood pressure when they came in for the study. And for some women, having their blood pressure taken was just excruciating. We know it hurts, right?
Yeah. Well, there's pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of hurts. You've got to squeeze that arm. You've got to cut the blood supply off. But for some women, it was outrageously painful. Yeah. And I'm sure it put their blood pressure up.
Yeah.
Because pain will do that to you, right? So you've got these super excitable neurons, is one thing. So that's this kind of high volume thing. And there's a problem with inhibition. So that ability to kind of go, oh, it's okay, it's gone, we can calm everything down again. So essentially that's, in a nutshell, what central sensitization is. There's a number of different conditions that come into the category of central sensitization. And fibromyalgia is one, migraine headache is considered to be another. So is some of the functional gastrointestinal disorders, which are now renamed disorders of gut-brain interaction. So that was a change that was made quite a few years ago already. I think it was 2016, where they became the DGBI. And that was as a result of feeling that the term functional gut disorders had been labeled as, well, we call it functional because there's nothing wrong. Whereas that's kind of was stigmatizing and invalidating for people because we now know that actually we can modify what's going on in the gut, and that can have an influence on how the brain responds. So the gut-brain axis, we talked about the gut musculoskeletal axis earlier. Well, there's probably better known is the gut-brain axis. What we think and how we feel influences our gut. We know that from our language. I've got butterflies in my tummy. Scared Xmas. I've had a guts full. All of these kinds of expressions in the human language that are connecting our emotion to our digestive system. And we now know that the digestive system sends signals right back to the brain again, and that's through nerve connections. A lot of people have heard about vagus nerve and how the vagus nerve is super responsive, and it's like a signaling highway between the gut and the brain. It's not necessarily the chemistry. There is chemistry produced in the gut, and that chemistry itself may signal the nerves. So, I guess while here, it's important to say, we know that a lot of serotonin is made in the gut, but that serotonin doesn't get into your brain. That serotonin is for the gut. It's involved in motility.
Yes.
So, but when the gut is in good order, the signals to the brain are those of, hey, it's all in order down here, not the serotonin itself making your brain feel good.
Yep. Yeah. And so you mentioned that, in so many words, that those people that are experiencing fibromyalgia can often feel a bit dismissed, that it's all in their head. So they're often treated only with pain medications. What are your thoughts on the importance of integrating digestive and gut investigations into the fibromyalgia workup? And what advice would you give the health practitioner to avoid missing that angle?
Yeah, it should be a should be part of the diagnostic stuff, really. I mean, not only pain medications, which don't really work, but also antidepressants. So it kind of reinforces that, oh, it's all in your head. I'll give you an antidepressant and I'm sure that'll make you feel better.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, it's so common that people are dismissed, and it's almost, you know, along with the IBS, almost a bit of a wastebasket diagnosis. Sometimes I have people who have been told they've got fibromyalgia. They don't meet the criteria. So it's like, oh, well, this is a diagnosis that we can give to people that we don't really know what's going on. And because we don't know what's going on, we don't need to do any further investigation. I think doctors don't like having conditions that they don't understand. I think in integrative health, we're in a far better position to help people unpack these different aspects of their health, help them with their sleep. Their sleep is so important. It's so important for pain signaling. It's so important for their headache problems. It's important for their digestive problem, all sorts of things. So we have a multifactorial condition, and we need this multifactorial response and a strategy. So modifying the microbiome has been known to modify the pain that people with fibromyalgia experience. So we can't ignore that. We really need to find out what's going on at a microbiome level, and what's, you know, to do that kind of top to toe of their digestive system to identify the areas that need working on. But of course, there's no point doing a microbiome assay if your patient's not prepared to change their diet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about what
But maybe it might be the catalyst for them to change their diet, for them to see that on paper as well.
Well, I mean, if they paid the money to go and see something, they're probably more likely to engage in something that's evidence-based to help modify their outcome and their lifestyle. When they can see that, yeah, okay, I can see that this is going on. I mean, some of my sickest people have the lowest diversity in their gut microbiome, and getting that are most reactive, they're the hardest ones to get onto any kind of strategy to help turn that around.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's so important.
It is. And I just would love for you to walk us through the process of identifying or meeting the criteria for someone, and maybe the importance of why that diagnosis, that label might be important to someone. I guess one of them being that they do feel heard. But also, if you can give us any insight into some of the patients that you've had that maybe when you've acknowledged that pain and put a label on it, we don't like to always label things, but put a label on it, they feel heard. It's not all in their head, all the rest of it. Can you first, I've asked about 50 questions in that one sentence, but let's start with, what is the criteria at this point in time, 2025, that would highlight to you that this person is experiencing fibromyalgia?
So the criteria haven't changed in almost 10 years.
Okay.
So the main criteria that in the West we go by, so some countries, so Japan has slightly different criteria, for example. So we have what's called the ACR, which stands for American College of Rheumatology, 2016 fibromyalgia criteria. So essentially, as I mentioned before, the body gets divided up into these regions. They have to have pain in 4 of those 5 regions, and the symptoms have to have been present for at least 3 months. The pain is not including the joints. I think that's a really important distinction that people kind of go, oh, yeah, I've got pain in my leg. It's my knee. Well, it's because I injured my knee. No, your knee doesn't count. Fibromyalgia tends to be muscular, in the muscular areas, and or just under the skin. Like, you know, think about this woman whose arm I squeezed and just got pulled through the roof during her blood pressure. And this widespread pain index is this other criteria. So there's 19 different areas of the body around these 5 regions, and the widespread pain index needs to be either 7 or more, with their other symptoms that score at least 5. Or their widespread pain index can be a little lower, and the criteria state between 4 and 6 of these different ear parts of the body with the symptom severity score. So that's all of the depression, cognition, unrefreshing sleep, abdominal pain, etc., where that scores 9 or more. So those are the symptoms, and the diagnosis is valid regardless of whether they happen to also have osteoarthritis. Yeah, so as long as you're not bringing the osteoarthritis into the pain question, then these regions and these areas are the way that it's used. So we don't do tender point diagnosis anymore. Tender points are just trigger points.
Yeah.
So that's why when I was doing it with my students, when I was teaching undergrads, it's like, well, no wonder everyone's got pain in those spots.
Yeah.
They're just trigger points.
Most people do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why we go get trigger point therapy, and it's usually quite painful.
Yeah. Very painful.
Yeah.
So that's it for the fibromyalgia diagnosis. It's pretty simple, really. And often people with fibromyalgia know that it doesn't seem to matter if they take pain relief. It doesn't really hit the spot. So that's also an interesting thing. We know that the mechanisms are different than those that are typically targeted by most of the pain medication. It doesn't stop doctors prescribing them. It doesn't stop people taking them in the hope.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So what are some actionable steps given the knowledge that we have around fibromyalgia? Would you be doing shotgun metagenomics testing, potentially SIBO, potentially put them on a Mediterranean diet? What are some other things that you might be suggesting? And again, this is so broad spectrum when it comes to, it's so case by case, depending on what's going on for that person. But what are some common things that you might be recommending? Sleep, you mentioned as well, being really
100%.
So a vicious cycle too, isn't it? Though, if sleep is disrupted.
If you're in pain, you're not going to sleep very well.
Yeah.
And if you don't sleep very well, your pain's going to be stronger. So, just sort of reflecting on some of the dietary nuances of people in my study. Sodium, for example. So women with fibromyalgia had a really high sodium diet. So we know that sodium is going to leach the calcium out of your system. And if you leach the calcium out of your system, your muscles are going to feel pain more. You're going to be more likely to have spasms and cramps and nocturnal pain. So that's kind of just one of those things that's going to help over time get the diet into a more healthy state. We found that women with fibromyalgia had about 25% less dietary fiber than women without fibromyalgia. So we know that dietary fiber is important for a gut microbiome, but I don't know why those women had less dietary fiber. Was it just because they didn't know how to eat properly, or was it because of their digestive distress? So a lot of people with unhappy guts will modify their diet to be lower in fiber and lower in those sort of fermentable compounds, which we know are important for a healthy microbiome. So we also, I found that improving the range, one of these aspects of the Mediterranean diet would be getting these sort of colourful fruits and vegetables, and the emphasis on vegetables rather than fruits, to try to modulate their oxidative stress. So the test that I did in the study measured their oxidative stress and measured their redox, their antioxidant status. So we had 3 measures. So one was how much oxidative stress there was. The second was how much antioxidant potential there was. And then, of course, you get a sum formula at the end of that. And what we found was that the higher the oxidative stress, the worse their fibromyalgia, what we call the FIQR, the fibromyalgia impact score. We use the SF36, which is a general pain measure, not specific to fibromyalgia. So that was worse in people who had higher oxidative stress. And also the functional bowel disorder severity index. So these things, I think, are all linked. So when we can give a person a more anti-inflammatory diet and around a diet that gives them that diet quality, we'll get better sleep, lower pain, and easing of their gut symptoms as well. So I think those are really key things. And then another really important aspect is getting them moving.
Yeah.
So the movement helps with flushing endotoxins out of the system. It helps with mood. It helps with the immune function. It's such an important aspect. And it's, again, a hard thing for people to do when they hurt all over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's finding some kind of movement for them to do. One of the things I encourage people to do if they find movement really difficult, which of course, if you're inert and you've got a high sodium, high sugar diet, the weight gain is going to just keep stacking on. So finding a way to move is really, really important. So whether that's an exercise at home or getting out and doing some water walking, anything that moves the body a bit more than whatever they're doing now.
And you've mentioned so colorful vegetables, polyphenol type stuff, but also pomegranate.
Yeah.
What about some supplements? Do you tend to find yourself recommending certain prebiotics, for example, or certain strains of probiotics that you, again, case by case, depending on what's going on for the person, but some that are sort of walking out the door more than others?
Yeah, I actually have a cheat sheet.
I do.
Yeah, I have a cheat sheet.
We love our cheat sheets when it comes to what these things produce, what metabolites, what bacterial strain.
Yeah, I actually just delivered a fun workshop at the Gastro A&P conference in Portland, Oregon, where they'd heard about me and my prebiotic blends that I do. So like a lot of herbalists will do a herbal formula, I do a prebiotic formula for people. And it's based on their microbial signature. So what I see coming back on their stool testing, I kind of go, okay, these are the prebiotics that are going to be indicated for you, things that are going to help suppress that kind of quadrant of your microbiome, and these things to support what's missing or absent. And often we're starting off on super small doses and just building them up gradually. So yeah, I love prebiotics. I don't think they're a replacement for a wholesome diet, but most people aren't going to go out and eat a lot of the foods that they've been avoiding because they cause digestive symptoms. So if we can start off with just some powders of those things and get them incorporating them bit by bit, I think that's a really good start. In terms of probiotics, again, it's just very much on a case by case basis. Yeah,
absolutely. And in regards to prebiotics, though, I do agree, go slow and low, but great when you're traveling as well, because people's diets tend to be much less fiber full, and all the rest of it. So I think, and then guts might be a little bit disrupted there. So it's just a little concentrated way of, supporting the gut in a little way.
There is, I think one of the little words of caution there is around just finding one fiber, one prebiotic fiber and sticking to it.
Yes. Oh, you don't agree with that?
I'm not a fan. So if you look at all the studies, I haven't found a single study that's used mono prebiotic therapy that didn't report decreased diversity.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, that makes sense. If you eat the same food every day, you're not going to have diversity either. Yeah. So this is why, this whole concept of 30 to 40 different plant foods a week, we know that that's important for diversity. So if a person's eating the same prebiotic fiber, adding, I don't know, teaspoonful of partially hydrolyzed guar gum or just going straight for the inulin, then it's going to favor development of the microbiome in a particular direction rather than giving that broad, like a varied diet. We need a varied diet for our microbes. So it doesn't make sense to give just one.
And what are your thoughts if someone's got a chronic gut condition going on, or they're really sensitive to things, starting with a prebiotic, say partially hydrolyzed guar gum, and then introducing GOS or inulin or something down the track and do more of a cycling type situation rather than all at once?
Yeah,
sometimes people might be very reactive to GOS and not so much with PHEG and those sorts of things. So, sometimes we do need to be a little bit nuanced, I think, when it comes to just throwing everything at it too. But if you can tolerate it, yes, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, and usually my blends are, they're emphasizing what I know is going to be okay, and then it's often smaller amounts of the other things at the get-go, and then, over time we can change that blend. But yes, there are some super sensitive people that I'll give small packs of all the different ones, go, okay, get started on that one, and then mix that one in, and away you go with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
And is there anything else that you think is worthy of mentioning that we haven't spoken about when it comes to fibromyalgia and the gut link?
Yeah, the gut begins in your mouth.
Yes. So
And that was quite a remarkable finding in the study. So I had never set out to do the oral microbiome or the oral health of my cohort, but it was something that my microbiome sponsor offered. They said, well, we've got it, let's do it. So then I did a survey to measure their oral health, and oh my goodness me, the poorer a person's oral health score, the worse their pain.
Yeah.
So that was gold. That was pure gold.
Yeah.
Gut begins in the mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a few podcast episodes on the oral health link and brain and gut. So I'll link that to the show notes. But yeah, absolutely. You want to be looking at that area. And also if you're a practitioner, asking those questions around dental health and oral microbiome.
And we forget it, right? It's like, oh, how's your mouth? Oh, good.
Yeah. No, everything, crowns, sensitivity, bleeding, all of the things when we want to be on some bad breath.
How many root canals have you got?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can we find you, and what's next for you? What's on the horizon? So obviously you're moving to Australia. I'm going to put the links down for, if you're okay with it, for people that might be interested in taking over the.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, House of Health is my clinic in Auckland. It's got a couple of other kind of brands that run under House of Health. So Auckland Gut Testing and the Auckland Gut Clinic, a couple of the brands that run under there. And I'm still there. I mean, I haven't moved yet. I'm hoping that will happen next year. I will still do some telehealth consulting, but not as much as I do currently, that's for sure. It's carrying on doing the research that really floats my boat.
Yeah.
And
Great.
being able to help expand this knowledge base. And, I've got 2 other papers that are submitted for publication at the moment.
Anything to talk about, or?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet. And I haven't even started analysing the breath data. Yeah. Although one of the studies is kind of connected, and then it's kind of prompted me to do another application, to do another small study around something related to breath testing. But yeah, again, that's very early days. I haven't even started that one yet.
Oh, amazing. And any other presentations on the horizon? You just did the gastro A&P. Anything?
Yeah, so no, that's it for now. I haven't got, it was a busy year last year with conferences and so on. And but it's been quite nice just to sort of finish my PhD this year and wrap things up and get ready for that shift across the Tasman.
Awesome. Well, we can't wait to have you. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your pearls with us. I hope that you come back on. I've enjoyed chatting with you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Linda. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. And guys, if you have enjoyed this conversation, or you know someone that needs to hear it, please share this episode with them so they can fill up on the valuable content that Dr. Sharon Erdrich has presented to us today.
Thank you.